A farmer was digging on his property to repair his land. But while he was digging on his property, he unearthed a buried car and instantly realized something was terribly wrong. At first, it seemed like a forgotten object, until he looked inside. What he discovered wasn't just a hidden secret beneath the soil, but a truth powerful enough to change his life forever. Please support us by subscribing to the channel and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. Ethan Cole was a 58-year-old farmer who had spent most of his life working the same stretch of land in rural Montana. His days followed a quiet rhythm sunrise, coffee in hand, then straight out to the fields where he tended crops and maintained the property his father once owned. The land wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It provided, it endured, and it rarely surprised him. Ethan lived with his wife, Margaret, in a modest farmhouse surrounded by acres of open ground and aging trees that swayed with the seasons. Their children had long since moved away, leaving behind a silence that Ethan had grown used to, even found comfort in. For him, peace meant predictability. But there was one part of the land that refused to cooperate, a shallow, soggy patch near the center of his yard that collected water after every heavy rain. It had become more than an inconvenience. It was a problem that threatened his equipment and slowed his work. That morning, determined to finally fix it, Ethan rented a small excavator. He told himself it was just another job dig, level, and move on. He had no idea that beneath that patch of earth, something long buried was waiting. The engine of the excavator rumbled steadily beneath Ethan Cole, vibrating through the seat and into his bones as he guided the steel bucket into the damp earth. The morning air was still cool, carrying the faint scent of wet soil and grass. Everything about this job felt routine, predictable, controlled, familiar. At first, the digging went exactly as expected. The top layer of soil peeled away easily, dark and rich from recent rain. Ethan worked with practiced precision, carving into the ground inch by inch, occasionally pausing to check the depth and angle. He had done this kind of work dozens of times before. Nothing about it should have been unusual. But then, something changed. As the bucket cut deeper, the machine suddenly jolted just slightly, but enough for Ethan to notice immediately. His hands froze on the controls. That wasn't how soil behaved. He eased the bucket back and tried again, adjusting the angle carefully. Clunk! This time, the sound was unmistakable. Not the dull grind of rock or the crack of roots snapping, but something heavier. Hollow. Metallic. Ethan's chest tightened. He killed the engine. Silence flooded the yard. For a few seconds, he just sat there, staring at the disturbed patch of earth below. The wind brushed lightly through the trees. Birds chirped in the distance, but to him, everything felt unnaturally quiet, like the land itself was holding its breath. Slowly, he climbed down from the excavator. His boots sank slightly into the damp soil as he stepped into the shallow pit. Probably just scrap, he muttered under his breath, trying to steady himself. Old farms were full of buried junk-rusted tools, broken fencing, forgotten debris. He had found plenty over the years. But something didn't feel right. He grabbed a shovel and began clearing the area by hand, working carefully now. Each movement was slower, more deliberate. The soil clung stubbornly to the blade, heavier than before, almost as if it didn't want to give up what it was hiding. Then he saw it, a dull, curved surface beneath the dirt. Ethan dropped to one knee, brushing away soil with his gloved hand. The texture was unmistakable cold, solid, and smooth in a way that no natural formation could ever be. Rust flaked under his fingers, revealing darkened metal beneath. His breath caught. "No," he whispered. He cleared more dirt, faster now, his heart beginning to pound. The shape became clearer, too symmetrical, too deliberate. This wasn't debris. This wasn't a tool. This was something much bigger. As he widened the area, a faint line appeared like the edge of a panel. Then another. The outline connected, forming something his mind struggled to accept. Ethan stood up abruptly, backing away a step as if distance might somehow make it less real. But the shape was undeniable now. He stared down at it, his pulse hammering in his ears. No way. His eyes scanned the pit again, trying to make sense of it, searching for any explanation that didn't lead where his thoughts were going. But there it was, a curved roofline, a section of what looked like a door, and just beneath the dirt, glass. Ethan's stomach dropped. This wasn't random. This wasn't something that had sunk naturally into the ground. It was too intact, too deliberate, too preserved. He stepped closer again, almost against his better judgment, and wiped away more soil from the glass surface. It was clouded, aged but unmistakably a window. A buried vehicle? Right in the middle of his property. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the partially exposed shape, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. Cars didn't just end up underground. Not like this. Not whole. Not hidden. Someone had put it there. That realization hit him like a cold wave. The ground he had trusted for decades suddenly felt unfamiliar beneath his feet. What else was down there? And more importantly, why had someone gone to so much effort to make sure it was never found? Ethan slowly straightened, his grip tightening around the shovel. What had started as a simple job had just turned into something else entirely. Something darker, and deep down, a quiet, unsettling thought began to take hold. Maybe digging here was a mistake. Ethan told himself to slow down, but his hands didn't listen. Something deep inside him, a mix of dread and curiosity, pushed him forward. He couldn't walk away now. Not when the truth was already clawing its way to the surface. He climbed back into the excavator, his movements more cautious this time. The engine roared back to life, but the sound no longer felt comforting. It felt intrusive, like he was disturbing something that had been buried on purpose. Instead of digging deeper, Ethan began widening the hole. Carefully, slowly. The bucket scraped along the edges, pulling away thick layers of soil and clay. Each scoop revealed more of the object beneath, more metal, more structure, more confirmation of what he already feared. Within minutes, the outline became undeniable. It was a car! Not crushed, not broken apart. Whole. Ethan shut off the engine again, his breathing shallow as he stared down into the pit. The rear end of the vehicle was now visible, rounded, intact, eerily preserved despite years underground. Rust clung to the edges, but the structure itself hadn't collapsed the way it should have. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second was how it was positioned. Too level, too centered, as if it had been placed there with precision. Ethan climbed down again, his boots slipping slightly on the loose dirt. This time, he didn't grab the shovel right away. Instead, he crouched near the exposed metal, studying it like a man trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want the answer to. The soil around the car told a story. And it wasn't a natural one. The layers were uneven, disturbed, mixed, packed back in. There were patches of lighter dirt shoved between heavier clay, as if someone had filled the hole quickly but deliberately. This wasn't something that had sunk over time. This was something that had been buried. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Someone did this," he whispered. He reached out slowly, brushing dirt away from the back of the vehicle. The shape of a bumper emerged. Then the faint outline of a taillight lens, dulled and cloudy with age but still there, still intact. That detail sent a chill down his spine. If the car had been dumped carelessly, the glass would have shattered, the frame would have twisted. But this looked like it had been lowered gently into the ground. Like it mattered that it stayed whole. Ethan swallowed hard and moved along the side, clearing more dirt with his hands now. His gloves scraped against metal, pulling away clumps of wet soil that seemed almost reluctant to let go. Then he saw something else. A thick, rusted chain half buried beneath the frame. He froze. The chain was looped tightly around part of the undercarriage. Not tangled. Not random. Placed. Used. Ethan's heart began to pound violently. That was it. That was the detail that shattered any remaining doubt. They didn't just bury it, he muttered. They lowered it. The image formed in his mind before he could stop it. A dark night. Engines turned off. Men working in silence. A vehicle slowly descending into a hole, guided by chains. Careful, controlled, intentional. Ethan staggered back slightly, shaking his head as if trying to push the thought away. No. But the evidence was right in front of him. This wasn't abandonment. This was concealment. His eyes drifted toward the rear of the car again. Part of the trunk area was still buried. But enough had been exposed to suggest it hadn't been opened in a very long time. And suddenly, a thought hit him. What if something was still inside? The air around him felt heavier, thicker. Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans, but they felt colder now, like the chill had seeped in deeper than the surface. He looked around his property, the barn, the fence line, the open fields he had trusted his entire life. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Because now he knew. This land had been used. For something hidden. Something someone never wanted found. Ethan turned back to the pit one more time, staring at the half-buried car. A silent, rusted secret, waiting to be fully uncovered. And for the first time since this started, a single terrifying realization settled in his chest. If he kept digging, he might uncover something he could never forget. Ethan stood at the edge of the pit, staring down at the half-buried car, his chest rising and falling slower now, but heavier. At first, it had been curiosity. A strange object, a buried mystery. Something unusual but explainable, but that feeling was gone, replaced by something colder. Something that settled deep in his gut and refused to leave. He told himself he should stop, walk away, call someone. But instead, he climbed back down. Carefully. Every step felt different now, like he wasn't just stepping into a hole, but into something he didn't fully understand. The air near the car felt stale, almost suffocating. The smell of damp earth mixed with something older, something trapped. Ethan crouched beside the driver's side window. Up close, it looked worse. The glass was coated in layers of dirt and time, but still intact, still holding whatever was inside away from the outside world. Like a barrier. His reflection stared back at him faintly. Distorted. Uncertain. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, slowly, he wiped the glass with his sleeve. The dirt smeared, revealing just enough to see through. And that's when everything changed. Ethan froze. Inside the car, shapes began to take form in the dim, dusty interior. At first, it was hard to tell what he was looking at, just shadows. Outlines. Then his eyes adjusted. The driver's seat? Still upright. Still positioned like someone had been sitting there. Not slumped, not broken. Just waiting. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. No, he whispered. His heart started pounding again, louder this time, harder. He leaned in closer without realizing it, his hand pressing lightly against the cold glass. And then he saw it, a shape in the seat. Faded, motionless, but unmistakably human. Ethan staggered back as if the car had pushed him away. His mind refused to accept what his eyes had just seen. No, that's not possible. But it had to be, because nothing else made sense anymore. The position of the car, the careful burial, the intact structure. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a tomb. A wave of nausea hit him suddenly, forcing him to turn away. He bent slightly, hands on his knees, trying to steady himself as the reality crashed down on him all at once. This wasn't abandoned property. This wasn't forgotten junk. This was something someone had hidden. Deliberately. Permanently. Ethan wiped his mouth, his hands trembling now. He couldn't stop shaking. Why would anyone do this? Who was inside? And more importantly, who had put them there? His eyes darted back toward the car. But he couldn't bring himself to look inside again. Not fully. Not after what he'd seen. Because now it wasn't just a mystery. It was evidence. And whatever had happened here, it wasn't an accident. A cold realization settled over him, like a shadow. If someone had gone through this much effort to hide a body, then whoever did it had something to lose. And secrets like that didn't stay buried without a reason. Ethan slowly climbed out of the pit, his movements unsteady. The ground above felt unfamiliar beneath his boots, like he had stepped into a different place entirely. The farm looked the same. The house, the trees, the open land stretching into the distance. But it no longer felt like home. It felt like a crime scene. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, twice, trying to think. He needed to call someone. He needed help. Because whatever was inside that car was bigger than him, bigger than this land. And for the first time since he started digging that morning, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. Not curiosity, not confusion, but regret. Deep, immediate, and impossible to ignore. He should have stopped. He should have walked away the moment the metal appeared. But now it was too late, because he had looked inside. And what he saw would stay with him forever. Ethan didn't waste another second. With trembling hands, he pulled his phone from his pocket and stepped farther away from the pit, as if distance could somehow protect him from what he had just seen. His voice shook as he spoke to the dispatcher. There's a car buried on my property," he said. "And I think there's someone inside." There was a pause on the line. Then the tone shifted professional, alert. "Sir, stay where you are. Do not approach the vehicle. Officers are on the way." Ethan lowered the phone slowly, his eyes drifting back toward the pit. The car sat there in silence, half exposed, as if it had been waiting all these years for this exact moment. Within 20 minutes, the quiet isolation of the farm was gone. The first patrol car arrived in a cloud of dust, followed by another, and then another. Doors slammed, radios crackled, voices cut through the stillness. The world had changed. An officer approached Ethan, his expression serious but controlled. "You the one who called this in?" Ethan nodded. "I didn't touch anything after I realized what it was." The officer gave a short nod of approval. "Good. Stay back. We'll take it from here." Yellow tape went up quickly, stretching across the yard, cutting through the land Ethan had walked freely his entire life. Just like that. His property was no longer his, it was a scene. A place of evidence. More vehicles arrived. Among them, an unmarked SUV. From it stepped a man in his late 40s, sharp-eyed, composed Detective Mason Reed. He didn't waste time. "Walk me through everything," he said, his voice calm but firm. Ethan explained it all, the digging, the sound of metal, the discovery, and finally, what he had seen through the window. Reed listened carefully, his gaze occasionally shifting toward the pit. When Ethan finished, the detective exhaled slowly. "You did the right thing calling this in," he said. But there was something in his tone, something that suggested this was bigger than a simple discovery. Reed approached the edge of the pit, crouching down to examine the exposed vehicle without touching it. His eyes moved methodically over the soil, the structure, the positioning. Then he stood up. "This wasn't random," he said quietly. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "I figured that much." Reed nodded. "No, this was planned." Within the hour, forensic teams arrived. Cameras flashed. Evidence markers were placed. Every inch of the site was documented before anything was disturbed further. Ethan stood at a distance, watching strangers take control of the place he had known so well. It felt surreal, like he was observing someone else's life. Shit. A technician carefully cleared more dirt from the rear of the car. Another worked along the side, exposing the license plate just enough to read part of it. "Got something," one of them called out. Detective Reed stepped closer. The numbers were faded, partially eaten away by rust, but still legible enough. Reed's expression changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. Reed didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to one of the officers. "Run it." Minutes passed, but to Ethan, it felt like hours. Every second stretched under the weight of anticipation. Then the radio crackled. "Plate comes back to a missing vehicle, reported 22 years ago." Silence. Ethan's heart dropped. "Registered to a man named Victor Langley. Disappeared same year. Case went cold." The words hit like a hammer. 22 years. That meant, all this time, the car had been here, on his land, while he lived his life above it, unaware. Ethan ran a hand over his face, trying to process it. "A missing person," he whispered. Detective Reed finally turned to him. "This just became a lot bigger than we thought." The investigation escalated instantly. More units were called in. A forensic tent was set up over the pit. Specialists arrived, each one treating the scene with increasing caution. Because now it wasn't just a buried car. It was a potential crime scene tied to a decades-old disappearance. Ethan watched as they carefully opened part of the vehicle. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like they were handling something fragile, something dangerous. A technician leaned in with a flashlight, then paused. "There's personal items inside," he said. A bag was retrieved. Then another. Among them, a worn leather wallet. Detective Reed opened it carefully, revealing a faded driver's license. He studied it for a moment, then closed it again. "That's him," he said quietly. Ethan felt the weight of those words sink into his chest. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a man, a life, a story that had ended right here beneath his feet. And for over 2 decades, no one had known where he went. Until now. Ethan looked out across his land, his mind racing. What had happened that night? Who had brought the car here? And how had something this big stayed hidden for so long? Detective Reed seemed to read his thoughts. "We're going to dig deeper," he said. "Not just here, but into the past. Everyone connected to this. We're going to find out what happened." Ethan nodded slowly. For the first time since the discovery, something shifted inside him. Yes, there was fear. Yes, there was regret. But there was also something else. Something unexpected. Because what he had uncovered wasn't just a secret. It was a chance to finally give answers to a story that had been buried for decades. A chance to bring the truth back into the light. And whether he wanted it or not, Ethan had just become the man who started it all. By the second day, Ethan Cole no longer felt like the owner of the land. He felt like a stranger standing on it. The yellow tape still stretched across his yard, fluttering in the wind like a warning. Patrol cars came and went. Unfamiliar faces walked across the soil he had spent decades tending only now. They weren't looking at crops or drainage problems. They were looking for answers. And somehow, Ethan was now part of that search. He stood near the porch, arms crossed, watching as investigators moved with quiet intensity around the pit. Every movement was deliberate, every word measured. This wasn't just work anymore. It was an investigation into something that had been hidden for over 20 years. And his land, his quiet, predictable land, was at the center of it. That realization changed something inside him. Just days ago, Ethan had believed he understood every inch of this property. He knew how the soil shifted after rain, where the ground softened, where the roots ran deep. But now it felt like the land had been lying to him, or worse, keeping something from him. He rubbed his hands together slowly, staring out at the field. "How long was it there?" he murmured under his breath. 22 years. 22 years of seasons passing, of crops growing, of life moving forward while beneath it all, something terrible had remained untouched. Ethan felt a chill run through him. How many times had he walked over that exact spot? How many times had his children played there, without ever knowing what was beneath their feet? The thought made his chest tighten. Inside the house, Margaret watched him from the window. Her expression was quiet, but heavy with concern. When she stepped outside, she didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, following his gaze toward the restricted area. "It doesn't feel the same anymore," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "No, it doesn't." There was a long silence between them. "I keep thinking," Margaret continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Someone knew. Someone put that there, and walked away like nothing happened." Ethan's jaw tightened. He hadn't allowed himself to fully think about that part yet. But she was right. This wasn't just a mystery. It was a decision. Someone had chosen this land, chosen to hide something here, and then lived their life as if it never existed. Ethan felt something shift inside him, not fear this time, not even regret. Something stronger, a quiet, rising anger. "Whoever did this," he said slowly, "they thought it would stay buried forever." Margaret looked at him. And now, Ethan's eyes drifted back to the investigators, to the pit, to the place where everything had changed. "Now it won't." That was the moment he realized something else. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was the one who found it, the one who uncovered it, the one who made it impossible for the truth to stay hidden. That came with responsibility and consequences. Over the next few days, Ethan answered questions. Over and over again, Detective Mason Reed sat with him more than once, going through timelines, details, even small things. Ethan barely remembered what time he started digging, how deep he went, what exactly he saw first. Each time, Ethan told the same story, carefully, honestly, because now he understood. Every detail mattered. Every word could help piece together what had happened all those years ago. And for the first time in his life, Ethan found himself thinking beyond his farm, beyond his routine, beyond his own world. There was a family out there, somewhere, who had spent decades not knowing what happened to Victor Langley. Waiting, hoping, and now, because of him, that silence was finally breaking. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling into his chest. This wasn't the life he had planned. He hadn't asked for any of this, but it had found him anyway. And standing there, watching the investigation unfold on the land he once trusted without question, Ethan understood something with absolute clarity. He could never go back to who he was before that morning. Because once you uncover the truth, you don't get to forget it. You carry it with you. And whether he was ready or not, Ethan Cole was no longer just a farmer. He was a witness to something buried in darkness, now finally coming into the light. The days that followed no longer felt like part of Ethan Cole's old life. They felt like the unfolding of something that had been waiting for decades. The investigation moved forward with quiet determination. Evidence was collected. Records were reopened. Names that had long faded into the past were spoken again, this time with purpose. Victor Langley was no longer just a missing person. He was found, and that changed everything. Ethan stood at a distance one afternoon as Detective Mason Reed spoke with a woman who had just arrived. She looked older, her hair touched with gray, her posture steady but heavy with years of waiting. She was Victor's wife. For a moment, Ethan couldn't bring himself to approach. This wasn't his grief. It wasn't his loss. But it was his land. And somehow, that connection made it impossible to stand completely apart. When their eyes finally met, there was no anger in hers, no blame, only something deeper. Relief and pain intertwined. "You're the one who found him," she asked softly. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I didn't know. I was just—" "I know," she said gently, stopping him. There was a long pause. Then she reached out and took his hand. "Thank you for not leaving him there." Those words hit Ethan harder than anything else had. Not the discovery, not the investigation, not even the fear. Because in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't just about what had been buried. It was about what had been waiting to be found. For answers. For closure. For truth. As the investigation progressed, more details came to light. Connections were uncovered. The story, once lost in silence, began to take shape again. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But it was moving forward. And that mattered. Ethan's land, once just a place of routine and quiet labor, had become something else entirely. A place where truth resurfaced. A place where a story, buried for over 2 decades, was finally being told. In the weeks that followed, life didn't return to normal. It couldn't. But it began to shift. The flashing lights disappeared. The investigators came less frequently. The noise faded. But the meaning of what had happened remained. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, Ethan stood alone near the edge of the yard. The same place where everything had begun. The ground looked almost unchanged now. But he knew better. Because he had seen what lay beneath. He had uncovered it. And in doing so, he had changed more than just his own life. He had given a family something they thought they would never have again. Answers? Closure. A chance to finally say goodbye. Ethan took a slow breath, the cool air settling in his chest. He hadn't set out to do any of this. He hadn't been searching for a mystery. He had only wanted to fix a problem in his yard. But sometimes, the smallest decisions lead to the biggest truths. And sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't start with courage. It starts with a single moment. A choice not to look away. Ethan turned back toward the house, where the lights were beginning to glow warmly through the windows. His life would never be exactly the same again. But in a quiet, unexpected way, he understood something now that he hadn't before. The truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And when it finally comes to light, it changes everything. Not just for those who lost, but for those who choose to uncover it. Ethan Cole's story is a powerful reminder that curiosity can open doors we never intended to walk through. What began as a simple task fixing a drainage problem led him straight into a truth that had been buried for decades. And once uncovered, it could never be ignored. There are moments in life when we face a choice, step back and pretend we didn't see, or move forward and confront what lies in front of us. Ethan could have covered the hole, walked away, and convinced himself it wasn't his problem. But he didn't. Because deep down, he understood something important. Truth carries responsibility. The truth may be buried, but it is never truly gone. And when it surfaces, it needs someone brave enough to face it. If this story made you think differently about the hidden truths around us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. What would you have done if you were in Ethan's position? Leave your answer in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.